Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to use CSS to basically structure a page with a basic banner, left navigation, body, and then a footer using CSS and identifiers, IDs if you will, in Dreamweaver CS4. So the first thing I do is I create a new page. When I create a new page, I save it in a folder that I've set up. Now, in this example, I always try to set up within my folders a folder for CSS and images by default. I'm going to call this HTML, index HTML that is. Okay, so when I get going, I start by creating my divs. The first thing that I like to do is I like to go to split view and I like to just type in my divs. But before I do that, you can always go to insert, I believe it's layout objects and div tag. And let's bring this up here. And I'm going to call this first one container. And then I'm going to, within that, just going to hit my enter key once and I'm just going to repeat these steps. And I'm going to call this one header. And I try to name them something meaningful. I try to keep it lowercase, all one word if whenever possible. Generally with everything web development, I try to keep things lowercase and no spaces. So now I'm going to call this left navigation, or just left nav. And I tend to call the main area body. You could call it whatever you want. It's just something that's meaningful. And then I'm going to call this one footer. Okay. So with that, I'm going to save it. And now I need to create my CSS. So I'm going to create a new file. And there's a lot of ways that you can do this without going through these steps, but this is kind of the old way I did it, and I just think it's good to think of the CSS file as a separate file. So I'm going to hit CSS and hit create, and I'm going to save this as master CSS, and I'm going to save it within my CSS folder. So once I've created it, I'm going to actually close it. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to actually link now that CSS file to this HTML page. So I believe you go under Format, CSS Styles, and then I'm going to attach a style sheet. And right now that style sheet doesn't have anything in it, but it will soon. So I'm going to browse for it. I put it in my CSS folder, and there it is. I'm going to hit OK. Now what that's done, if I go to Split View, if I scroll up to the top, I can see right here in my head that it's linking to CSS master, CSS/master.css. So that's linking to it. And what Dreamweaver CS4 does and CS5 is now it allows me to look at the CSS file or the HTML source code, and so I can switch back and forth, even though they are two separate files. And so that's a very, I think, helpful addition. But it's something that sometimes can throw people off. So I'm going to go back to design view, and I'm going to right now stay in my source code. So one of the things that I like to do when I start working on this is I like to change the colors of these divs as I work with them, so I can visually see it has the text. So really this isn't necessary, but it kind of gets you thinking about this. So what I like to do is I like to work when I work with CSS. To be honest, I like to work straight in code view, but I think it's helpful when you start off to use the CSS panel. So I'm going to go to Window and then CSS Styles, and I'm going to pull it up. And so I'm going to click on the plus sign for a new CSS rule. And in this case, I'm just going to do the footer, and actually let's hit cancel. If you put your mouse wherever you want when you do this, it basically should respond. And so in this case, it's thinking I want to actually do the paragraph tag. So I'm going to put my mouse actually in the very front, and we'll see if it just will pick up the container itself. It still doesn't want it, so I'm just going to hit the backspace and get rid of it. So I want to work on container. I want it to go to master, so it picked up on that, and I'm going to hit OK. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to basically go select box, and I'm going to put a width. And I'm going to build this one. I tend to build my websites with a fixed layout, and so there are times where you want to do a liquid kind of a percent that's going to adjust no matter how big the screen is. More often than not, I find that I still like to do a basic fixed screen. So I'm building this for a 1024 style resolution, so I'm going to actually select 960, and that really goes back. There's a whole school of thought that 960 is divisible by a good, I believe, by 12, and it works real well if people are going to do a number of different things with CSS. We're not going to get into any of that right now with the 960 grid system, but for now, I'm just selecting 960. And if I wanted to, I could actually put a margin across all of them, so we'll just put 10 pixels, and I'm going to hit OK. So the container's the only one that I don't really play with the color, and so I'm going to get rid of any HTML here. There we go. But now I'm going to repeat these steps of adding things to, and so I'm going to actually just get rid of that, and it's just going to be the header, CSS. It's good. And right now all I'm really wanting to do is to add some color. And so that's all I'm doing right now. So we'll start with red. We'll click on left nav. We're going to repeat these steps. And I wouldn't have to get rid of container, but I'm doing this just so you can have more control over what you do. Background yellow. Okay. I'm just repeating these steps. So we'll go green. And if you want this expand all times, I can click this, and here's my CSS, and I can actually get rid of some of these things if I just want to have it nice and big. And I'm going to repeat the last steps for footer. Alright. So let's go with the blue. So now it really helps me kind of see just the layout of each of my divs. So I'm going to go to split view because I can see there's some HTML or something in here I want to get rid of. And there it is. It's this paragraph. I'll get rid of that. Alright, so this is what I want when I start. So I'm going to save this. And so now that I have the basic width of my page set up, I can start going through and working on the other things that I want to do. So my header I'm going to keep exactly with this width. And so the header I'm going to actually at this point get rid of the color because I'm going to put in a banner image that I'd created. Now this banner image I used a basic color scheme that I found on this website, Color Schemer. Usually I would actually go to Adobe site, Cooler. It's probably the best one out there for color schemes. I'm not real good with color schemes, so I like to start with something that someone else has found. So in Dreamweaver, to add an image, I go to Insert, Image, and I go into my image folder where I've created my banner. So I'm going to put my banner in here, and you notice that its width is 960. So it should fit in here fine. I don't remember exactly what I called this, so I'm trying to give some alternative text. Normally you would give something a little more meaningful, but there's my banner. So now I'm going to adjust my left nav. And so you can do this a number of ways. You could go down and use the position and do an absolute position, or a lot of times people like to use floats. So you could try either way, whichever way works best for you. I'm going to use left. There it is. And so I'm going to actually add a width for this. I'm going to do this 150 pixels. Okay. And then my body, I'm going to float to the right. And I could play with the width if I want to with that too. I could do so if I do 960 minus 150, it's about 810, so I could put that in here, but once I start playing with margins, I might, adjust this more later, but for now, that's good. And then I'm not adding any heights. Usually you would let it stretch, but you could, if you wanted to, add a height tag in here, especially if it was helpful in the beginning. If you wanted to say 500 pixels, you'd at least see what it starts to look like. To me, that's less important because the text or whatever's in it will usually dictate the height. So then I will add, if I want my footer to show up at the bottom, if I usually add a clear, it'll show up at the very bottom. So just like that, I'll actually decrease this so you can kind of see I've added this in here. And so it's a basic layout. And so if I add more text in here or add enter, you'll see how this fills out. And so that's a basic way of using divs to set up a layout with a left navigation, body, and a footer. I'm going to show you now a way to do it in a second video of doing a top navigation, so rather than a left. But then in subsequent videos we'll talk about, well, how would you use CSS to format the pages and format the links. But this is a basic way of using divs to set up the layout of a website. Thanks.